I want to get started on time because, like I said before, you guys have places to be, and if anyone needs to trickle in, then that's fine too. So welcome. I think I've had the pleasure of speaking with everybody who's been here so far, or in here so far, which is great. And now you get to hear me do the full spiel. So this will be a great opportunity to just really get into the details of why a gap year can be so powerful as a tool of education, and also how to actually go into the planning process. So first of all, I'm sure that a lot of you are here trying to answer this teeny little question that a lot of people are leaning towards as they finish their high school experience. And I think that society has done young people a disservice in making them feel like this is the question. And I think that taking a gap year really asks students to ask different questions. So instead of saying, what do I want to be when I grow up, or what do I want to do with my life, it's more about like, who do I see myself becoming? And what do I need to make good choices about the next steps? It asks smaller, more reasonable questions of young people that end up becoming the foundation for living what I would consider a flourishing life. So that's really what we're talking about when we talk about gap time. So a little bit about me. This is so large that my face is like almost life-size. I am a professional gap year counselor, and I've had the absolute pleasure of partnering with VSAC for many years on delivering gap year education in many forms, including at the college and career pathways. So I got started in gap year planning and gap year mentorship almost immediately after my own gap year, which I took after college. That top photo is myself and my friend Will in Tanzania. I spent almost a year there after college, and I was working in public health. So I was working in schools, delivering a public health education to the students there who would not have gotten any kind of health education otherwise. It was such a formative experience for me. It was impactful in all the ways an experience like this can be, and it made me ask the question, what would have been different about my college experience if I had done that first instead of after college? And the answer was everything would have been different. I probably would have had a different major. I would have taken college a lot more seriously. I would have known why I was there. I would have appreciated it. And it's not to say that I didn't have an amazing college experience. I did, but I just feel like it would have given that it's such a layer of purpose. And so that's really why I got into the gap year space, because I think that there is such promise in this period of time. And you can also take a gap year in the midst of a college experience, or between college and the workforce or grad school, or mid-career, post-career, for any adults in the room. There's no wrong time to take a gap year, but I do think that it is a great time to take it and to consider it after high school. I also have worked with the Gap Year Association. Many of you who've been to the Gap Year Association table got to see brochures from many gap year programs, and the Gap Year Association also does data collection on the outcomes of gap years and all sorts of other good stuff. So it's an amazing resource. And I also host a podcast called Gap Year Radio, where I interview gap year alums. So you could say that I am passionate about the gap year option, I suppose. But for starters, let us talk about the definition of a gap year. A lot of people come to this idea with their own kind of preconceived notion of what a gap year is, but this is the actual official definition, is that it is an intentional period of time devoted to personal growth and exploration, supported by experiential learning. And so, as you'll note, there is no prescribed period of time. It can be 3 months, it could be 6 months, it could be a full year. It also is not telling you what you have to do, but it is the most important word in this definition, is that it is intentional. A gap year is not something that just happens if you don't make a plan for after high school, or if you sit in a basement for a year. That's not a gap year. A gap year is really about leaning in, and moreover, it's a time to focus on personal, practical, and pre-professional development. If you can find a couple of things in each of those categories to anchor your gap year to, it will be a very holistic, really good year. And I also have a little video that I'm going to show, and this is voices from Gap Year alums who did testimonial videos for the Gap Year Association about how they think about their gap year and what they want future students who might be considering this to know.
I didn't feel like a rush to go to college or university, and I felt like there was a lot that I could learn about myself and got like my passions through taking a gap year.
I wanted to be with people who had the same interests and were wanting to like explore new plays, to kind of discover how I maybe would have said about my life, what other than my education or my career.
Narrowing down your interests, or a break from school and learning.
Take an internship, figure out what they want to do later in life.
And getting practical experience.
Find yourself.
I've become a lot more social than I was before, and a lot more
about like stupid things, so I had the chance to just be on my own.
I can cook a lot more food now than I used to be able to.
Yeah, I'm definitely a lot more independent than I was.
It's just been the perfect like transition into like that living away from home, kind of like figuring out who I am as a person.
I would say to do it because you're only young.
Taking a gap year was one of the best decisions I've made in my life. I'm still reaping the benefits of that year right now in university.
So as you could see from all of those clips, a gap year can take so many different forms. It can be in just about any geographic location, including closer to home. And it really is around customizing it around the individual, which we'll talk a lot about as we move through. But I also wanted to just talk a little bit about why this can be such an impactful moment to take a gap year, especially, and I don't just mean moment in development, but I mean moment in time right now as the workforce is changing so rapidly. This is a report from the World Economic Forum about the most important employability skills for young people. And this was just released earlier last year. And so as you can see, a lot of these skills, it's no longer coding, it's no longer technical stuff as much. It is a lot about the human skills that cannot be replaced by a computer, that cannot be taken over by AI. The more human you can make yourself, the more competitive you will be in the emerging job market. And so what's really interesting about this list is that we cross-reference that with self-reported outcomes from gap year students. And there is a lot of crossover. This is students who talk about the skills that they've gained over the course of their gap year. And I believe that this is rated as, extremely strongly or strongly towards having developed competencies around these things. So gap years are really good at developing human skills because you are putting yourself out of your comfort zone by doing new and different things. You're working in collaboration with people. You're oftentimes drawing from your own curiosity and directing yourself in your learning. So this is what we want to see in the future. And I think that gap years can be such an amazing tool to making yourself more competitive, in addition to making yourself kind of a more realized version of yourself. And in addition, there's another really interesting data point that almost half of Gen Z say that they regret not taking a gap year. So the people that are kind of in this first half of your generation really wish that they had taken a gap year, which I think is really interesting. A lot of times they don't do it because they haven't had the pleasure of being in a room like this and hearing about it, but also because sometimes it can be a little bit confusing to think about what might you do? Will it cost a lot? A lot of those questions make the traditional path seem easier, but with a little bit of underpinning and planning and research, a gap year can come together pretty seamlessly. So I want to talk about real students who've taken gap time too, and this is Walker. He's a Vermonter, and he did a gap year he took a gap year because he knew what he wanted to do in school. He's a musician. He's studying composition right now, but he wanted to take a gap year and do completely different things that were not related to his major. And so I know that a lot of times students think that gap year students are people who don't know what they want to do, and that is true for some people, but for a lot of people like Walker, they know kind of what their path is, but they want to grow in different ways and develop themselves in different ways. So what he did was he spent the summer after graduation working at Shelburne Farms. Then he went in the fall and volunteered with monkeys at a rehabilitation center in Belize. That's also home to manatees, which is pretty cool. And then he was applying to college on his gap year, so he came home in time to work on his applications. And then in the second half of his year, he went to Thailand. He worked at a different wildlife sanctuary for about 2 months, and then he traveled for a little bit in Southeast Asia. And then to the last third of his year, he work exchanged his way through Europe, which is where you work in exchange for your room and board. So he was volunteering on farms. He volunteered to dog sit for a place in Switzerland that was like in the mountains. It was really cool. So he had a really diverse set of experiences that really taught him a lot about himself and a lot about the world. So this is another kind of stat slide about what the students are saying about themselves. And these are the kind of cherry-picked self-described outcomes that I think are really important for you all to know. Firstly, 95% of students surveyed, and this is a really wide-ranging survey of over 3,000 gap year students. 95% of them said that their gap year helped set them up well for their next step, whether that was college, the workforce, technical training programs. That is, I mean, I don't think you can find stats like that anywhere else. But we also see on this kind of development side of things, almost all the students surveyed also said that their maturity and their confidence skyrocketed, and that they learned how to develop the ability to interact with people of other backgrounds and cultures. And I think that we are in a moment right now where that skill is another thing that really needs to be developed in everybody. But if you can do it while you're young, all the better. And then a lot of students also say that they feel like they got a competitive advantage by taking a gap year. And this could be because of things that they did on their gap year, like an internship or job experience that help build that resume, but it's also because of all those soft skills that they're developing too. Students who take gap time, when they're more mature and more confident, they show up like that in interviews. And I've heard from employers that when they meet a gap year student, they can tell because of how mature that they are and how they communicate and all that kind of stuff. So, a little bit about who takes a gap year. And I like to flavor this with the zeitgeist every year, and this year, Stranger Things is what I decided to choose. So these are the profiles of students who I see taking gap time and really benefiting from it in different ways. So you might see yourself or your kid in some of these, but more often you see multiple versions of yourself or the Venn diagram of how they cross over. So first we have the worker. Now, the worker is going to be somebody who has high GPA, high test score, trying to get into a pretty elite college or at least a competitive college, and is also at pretty high risk of burnout. So a student who is a worker would take a gap year to recharge, to develop their identity outside of their academic achievements, and just basically learn how to chill. Because if you're going to a really, competitive school, that means that situation is also going to be high pressure. So learning how to balance your identity and learning how to balance your priorities is going to be really important before going into that experience. Then we have our meaning seeker. And our meaning seeker is going to be somebody who really usually is very bright and curious, tends to have high test scores, but maybe their GPA doesn't always match that promise because they really have to like what they are doing in order to show up fully in a course or in a project or something like that. And for these students, taking a gap year helps them figure out, A, what lights them up, and that's the only thing that will get them motivated. They have to want it, they have to see that direction. But when they do, they oftentimes re-identify completely with their college education because they see it as the means to get to where they want to go. And that helps them develop so much more of that motivation that's needed to really get the most out of higher education. We also see a floater. A floater is going to be somebody who just isn't their best in the academic environment. They could have various challenges that combine to make high school more challenging in this way. And sometimes they also have kind of failure to launch symptoms or other things that where they really need to build maturity and skills in order to kind of thrive in the adult world. And so those students are going to need programs and opportunities on their gap year that give them strong mentorship, strong skills building, and then help set them up for whatever's happening next. We also have a lot of pragmatists these days. Pragmatists understand that college is a huge investment, and they want to go, but they want to know why they are going. They have to have those reasons why they are investing their time and their money into a certain type of education. So a lot of times these students will use internships and job exploration as one of the aspects of their gap time so that they can arrive in higher education with more clarity. You'll see that I also talk about higher education or post-secondary education because I do want to be very inclusive of the fact that lots of students do lots of different things, and a gap year should lead to something else, but it doesn't necessarily need to lead to a four-year degree. It should lead to whatever makes the most sense for that particular student. We also have our adventurer, and adventurers are going to be people who just want to take a bite out of the world. They need to get out, they need to go see stuff, they need to experience things, and if they don't, they may not fully be able to settle into a serious college or higher education experience because they just need to spread their wings a little bit. This isn't usually the full profile of students, but usually there's a piece of adventurers in a lot of people. And then last we have the soul searcher. And soul searchers are another type of student who's had challenges in high school. It could be mental health challenges, could be physical health challenges, but for whatever reason, they have had a really hard high school experience. And for them, a gap year is going to be a reclamation year. It's going to be a year where they can feel fully well, and they can get any help that they might need to feel well. I have a lot of students who have mental wellness as a big part of their gap time, or also students who need to get an elective surgery or procedure, and they use a gap year as a way to do that without disrupting their education. So I have a student this year actually who had to get kind of a jaw surgery, and he was still able to do a full semester in Patagonia in the fall, and he just landed in Italy today for a couple months of language learning, and in between, he got that procedure done. So it's a great time to fit those kinds of things in if one needs to. So as you can see, this is an opportunity that can suit just about every type of learner, every type of profile, and Julian is a great example of somebody who did a half and half gap year. He was also someone who had a sense of what he wanted to do in college. He's at Parsons right now, and he's studying design, but he needed to get a little bit more maturity and really wanted to work on himself. So he spent half of his year, 6 months of his gap time, working at a local cheese shop in his hometown and building skills around communication. He had to work with people. None of the people he worked with were his peers, so he had to get that skill. He earned money to put towards the latter parts of his gap time, which ended up being, after the holidays, he went and did an internship in London where he got to visit design houses. He got to experiment with entrepreneurs who were doing kind of cool things in the arts world. It was like catnip for him. He was so excited to experience all of that. And then he ended his gap year with a 6-week kind of Euro tour with other gap year students. So again, a wide-ranging gap year that hit a bunch of different things and also had this progression of like from home geographically to further away geographically, which is common for some gappers. So if any of you, actually all of you have stopped by my table, so this is gonna be a familiar graphic, but this is how I like to help people understand what's out there for gap year opportunities. There is so much out there. Some is specifically designed for gap year students, and other things are things that you can do as a gap year student, even though they may not be created for you or meant for you. But a lot of things fall into this upper category of programs. These are things you sign up for. Oftentimes you're investing in them. They cost money. But what you get back, skills, mentorship, a schedule, the ability to grow in new and different ways, and then you might invest in, or you might offset that by self-designed experiences later in your year. So up here, it really runs the gamut, but experiential semesters, if you are Googling gap year program, that's usually what's coming up. These are cohort-based programs. Often they offer college credit. They're more structured, they're more themed, so you can do, if you've heard of NOLS, you can do a NOLS semester, which is more outdoor exploration, or you might do something that is more themed around culture and immersion or language. There's programs in the arts where you can do studio art or art exploration, art history. So there is a flavor for everyone. And these are really cool programs to especially start your gap year with because they are more structured and supported. Volunteering is another great option. So there's things that run the gamut of working with animals and conservation. So great for people who just love animals or people who might be pre-biology majors or want to investigate to see if they actually like field work, because you can get involved in tons of field work opportunities and other types of conservation work. This picture is actually a student who is working on coral replanting in the Caribbean. So while scuba diving. So this is like the cool thing is that you can combine like a fun thing with a serious thing and you come out with a lot of growth. There's also lots of work with people. So if you like community development work, if you have a cause or an issue that you care about, a lot of students will work with kids in teaching English as an English teaching assistant in countries where that is a skill that leads to more upward mobility economically and socially. So lots of really cool ways to volunteer. Usually these are also programs where you would meet other people from all over the world, other volunteers, but they're oftentimes more flexible. You can choose your length of time. You may even be able to choose when you start your program. So lots of cool opportunities there. We also have enrichment courses. This is great if there is a skill that you want to deepen, a hobby that you want to concentrate on. A lot of students love spending some time on studio art or their creative side. But there's also, I have a student who's right now signing up to surf in Sri Lanka. So if there's something that could be a lifelong skill, a gap year is a great time to invest in that. And there are also enrichment courses that can give you a little bit of a sense of maybe a college pathway too. So there are courses like you could take a course in fashion merchandising, or back when this was relevant, you could take coding courses and coding boot camps. You can do, there's lots of stuff you can do in hands-on carpentry and other types of engineering work where you can really test that interest out. So lots of cool enrichment courses. National service, this is AmeriCorps. So if you're interested in serving, are you an AmeriCorps alum? Which program? Wow. Wow, congrats, thank you for your service. AmeriCorps is the best, and a lot of people don't realize that AmeriCorps also has programs that are open to high school graduates who are over 18. So things like City Year, NCCC, Conservation Corps. So if you're familiar with the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, you can do that as a gap year student here in Vermont. Really cool opportunities there, and they're fully funded, and you get an education award to put towards college or your loans as part of your service. We have seen some funding cuts in those programs lately, so hopefully funding will come back to those to make them as robust as they deserve to be. Next, we have interning. Now, a lot of people think of interning as your mom is an attorney and a buddy could, work in her office and, get coffee for the other attorneys, that kind of thing. But there's actually internship programs. And the cool thing about these is that they actually are structured to match you in with an industry that you actually want to get experience in. So you don't need that network. If you don't have a network in the industry you're interested in, and you want to be somewhere far flung, these are really cool opportunities. So for example, I have a couple students right now interning in Cape Town, South Africa. One is working in commercial real estate, and another is working in human rights law. So these are gap year students with not much work experience, and they are building those resumes and getting to try that stuff out in the real world, and also live in apartments with other gap year students and try out that independent living and having the international experience. So that can be a real twofer or threefer as far as experience goes. Then we have the self-designed opportunities, and these are all opportunities that you make happen yourself. They're not under the umbrella of a program necessarily, but things like independent travel, backpacking through Europe or taking a road trip to see friends, local opportunities, working closer to home, interning closer to home, volunteering closer to home. Those are all really important opportunities to consider. If you don't want to be at home, there's also destination work where you can earn money while living away from home. So working at a resort that offers employee housing, working in our national parks, because a lot of those opportunities offer housing. You can even get working holiday visas and work in Australia or New Zealand if you're an American citizen. If you have dual citizenship, you have even more opportunities. So a gap year doesn't always have to cost money. You can actually offset it with working for part or even all of your gap year. Then we have personal projects. There could be a hobby or something that's stirring around in your mind that you want to tease out. I've had students who've written books of poetry, started businesses, expanded a nonprofit work or a project. So, yeah. And now you're still here. That's so cool. One of my best friends is from Scotland, and she worked in New York City and met her husband. The rest is history. Yep, it happens. It happens. So yeah, if you have a project brewing within you, a gap year is a great time to spend on that as well. And then work exchange. This is things like Woofing, Workaway, Worldpackers. These are all platforms. So they're not programs, but they're ways that you can connect directly with opportunities all over the world. So if you want to work at a hostel in San Jose, Costa Rica, or you want to work on a vineyard in Tuscany, or you want to work with sled dogs in Finland, those are all opportunities that are listed on these platforms. And basically you connect directly with those hosts, and you can say when you want to go and how long, and you can do that basically for free. It's usually free or low cost in exchange for 4 or 5 hours of work a day. So a lot of students will do this as a way to travel cheaply in other places in the world, which is really cool. This is a farm I visited in Costa Rica. That's a teaching farm. This is a latrine or a toilet that's built with like straw, hay bale, mud kind of siding, all completely eco-friendly. So he's teaching those students how to build that. Really cool stuff. So as you can see, the world is your oyster, but how do you bring it down to like a reality? We'll talk about what Elsa did to do this. She's a great example of a worker. So she was going off to a really, really good school, and beforehand was like, I don't need to take a gap year. I know I'm going to school. I'm ready to go to school. I don't need a gap year. Her dad is British, and in the UK, a lot of students take a gap year before college. It's very normalized. And so her dad was like, Elsa, go talk to Julia. Just explore it. And after one phone call, she was convinced on taking a gap year, but at the end of it, she said this, which I think is really cool. You're not missing out on anything. The people who don't take one are missing out. So she gave me one of the best quotes ever, but also she had a really wide-ranging gap year as well. She spent a semester with a gap year experiential semester in Nepal. This is her doing a stone carving apprenticeship with a master stone carver. she came home for the holidays, and then the second half of her year, she did an outdoor exploration course in Costa Rica, and was rappelling off waterfalls and getting a swift water certification and all sorts of other certifications. And then she ended her gap time with backpacking through Australia, New Zealand, and doing some conservation kind of work along the way with the Department of Conservation in each of those countries. So this is a great example of a gap year that has a progression to it, where she started with the more structured opportunities that had more buffering, had more mentorship, and worked her way into the more independent opportunities, ending with that backpacking. So when you're thinking about how to structure your year, this is a great model to think about, where you start with things that are, there's a little bit more structure to it, and then you take on more responsibility and independence as the year moves along. So how to make this all happen for yourself? We've talked a lot about parameters and goal setting, but parameters are really where you sit down as a family and everybody says their piece, basically. Parents, you say, okay, this is the budget that we're thinking that we can help you with, or these are our expectations around health and safety and the types of things that we would support and the types of things we won't support, and the gray area in between of things that we'll be like, oh, I guess, if you want to, but you really want, as parents, to kind of set those guardrails and then give as much power as you can to your young adult to make the choices that they want to make about their gap year. It may not be the choices that you would make, but if it's within the guardrails, you should let them make them, because that's part of the power of a gap year, is about the autonomy that's given to a young person. And for the young people, the students, this is where you can talk about your dreams and the things that you want to work towards and the things that you want help and support with. And that's really, that conversation and those continuing conversations are where those plans can start to come together in alignment with each other. Then we have geography. Where in the world can you go? This used to be a much more complicated question when things were still iffy after COVID, but now the world is back open and we're more playing whack-a-mole with global politics and stuff like that. So when you're talking about geography, you can also talk about where you have resources. Where do you know people? Do you have somebody with housing or family connections or other places where you might have a free place to stay or connections to people who have those kinds of things for you? So thinking about geography not just as where you might want to go and spend time, but also where you might have a network that can give you some resources as well. Also the progression, to reiterate one more time, that kind of starting, every student has a different starting point. Some students might need more support at the beginning. Other students that are really independent or already very well traveled, they might start without any types of structured opportunities, and that's totally fine. But just kind of understanding where the starting point is and then working towards giving more independence and more, other types of challenge as the year goes on. That's really what makes this such an amazing growth experience. And then we have our goal setting, our anchors, that personal, practical, and professional. And that's really where a gap year becomes not just blindly Googling and hoping that you find something, but saying okay, I have a goal to get proficient in Spanish, and I want field experience in biology, and I want to work on my social skills, and I also want to paint. And then you have something to work from. You can start saying oh, maybe I can go take a painting course in Guatemala, or I can go and do field research in Ecuador, or I can go take a language learning course in Sevilla, Spain, so that I can work on those goals. And that really helps you be much more specific in how you're finding the opportunities that work for you. And so this is just an example of what those goals can kind of look like. So the professional stuff is going to be things that you think you might want to do, whether it's an industry, a specific job, and it can get as general as you need it to get. Some students really have no idea what they want to do or be, and that is normal, because most of us, even now, have multiple jobs, multiple careers over the course of our lifetimes, and we need to know about what our skills are, what our strengths are, what kinds of environments we thrive in, so that can be part of this list as well. So that explore piece is really important. Next, we have the personal stuff. This is going to be stuff that's not related to what you're going to do or be, but this is actually the good stuff, right? These are things that you just want to do for fun, people you want to visit, things you want to see. I had one student once who couldn't tell me anything that they wanted to do on their gap year except for that they wanted to see a monkey. And so he ended up going to South Africa and working at a wildlife rehab center that specialized in vervet monkey rehab. And that ended up propelling him. He stayed there for almost a whole year. He went back home, went to a vet tech program, and is now a vet tech because he just from that one little kernel, he was able to tease out, oh, actually, that is something that I feel passionate about, I want to get the education for. So those personal goals can be lifetime things that just give your life color, or they might be more meaningful too. And then last, we have the practical stuff. These are all like those life skills that there's like just a lot of variation in how many life skills young people are developing depending on their own situation. I tend to find Vermonters are like much more with it than students from other areas of the country. No shade to other areas of the country, but like I think that Vermont parents give their students more opportunities to gain independence. I live in Stowe, and we send our kids starting in middle school to just have the run of the mountain. And that would be unheard of for some of my friends with kids in other areas of the country. So, but there's still so much more that you might need to gain. Like, for example, the converse. How do you operate within a city or an urban environment? Maybe you don't have that skill. Maybe you should build that skill on your gap year, along with cooking and budgeting and learning your laundry, or learning how to do laundry and all that good stuff. So if you can create this framework for yourself, again, that gives your year some shape and something to work towards. So how do we make it work financially? Well, first of all, just like in the parameters conversation, everybody has a different starting point. Some families come to a gap year saying, what we can give is our enthusiasm, or what we can contribute is our network of friends and family. Other times there is, like a dollar amount or a way to kind of do the finances where, a student earns and then they can meet that, a student gets matched from their parents based on what they earn towards their gap year. There's no wrong way to do it, but everybody comes from a different standpoint on the front end. And then you need to think about, what is this all gonna cost? And part of this conversation of understanding where your starting point is and your expenses are also, what does this young person need to thrive in their next steps? Because if your student is, for example, one of those floater personalities, if you put them in a college environment right away, it's not gonna stick. And then you're investing in this college education that's not really a good investment yet. So that family might choose to invest a lot more in a gap year experience than a student who's taking it for different reasons. But what you do want to understand, no matter where you're starting from, is what things cost. And all the programs I mentioned before, most of them do have a cost attached, but it can really range from next to nothing and low cost to the cost of a semester of college. And so you have to just think about what works best for your own situation. And then these other expenses, getting to those places, the daily expenses of living someplace, medicine. If you do want to go work with monkeys, you will probably need to get a rabies vaccine, even though nothing's bit you yet, because some of those organizations require that as a preventative measure, especially if they're more remote. And those things are not covered by insurance unless you're actually bit by the animal first. So that would be just something to know about, because those can be expensive. So those are the kinds of things you want to think about. And then you want to think about all these resources that you have. So the family contribution, another way to think about family contribution is parents, but also sometimes extended family can be a part of this. There might be grandparents, aunts, uncles, godparents who are generous and want to see this happen for a young person. Student having skin in the game, very important. So that could be different for different students, but I think that working and contributing to your gap year is a really worthwhile thing. 529 funds. If you choose to invest in one of these more structured gap year experiences that offer college credit, that also unlocks the opportunity to use 529 funds to pay for it. So that can be a really good tool, especially if a student is not going to be using all of those funds for whatever education they're choosing after their gap time. For example, if they're going to UVM and you have way more money because you're lucky in your college savings that you're going to use towards a UVM education, then it could make sense to use some of that money towards a gap year experience. Also fundraising, this is great if you are actually doing like a volunteer experience. It's less good if you're like wanting to sit on a beach in Bali, but fundraising is an opportunity too if you're doing something worthwhile and want to have that skill. And then scholarships and financial aid are available too. A lot of financial aid and scholarships come from programs directly. So if you have a program identified that you want to do, you can go on their website and see what they offer as far as scholarships. There's not a ton of outside scholarships that just like are open-ended and generally fund gap years yet, but you can sometimes find them on the Gap Year Association website if there are some. Or another trick is to go to your local Rotary. And if you present at your local Rotary about what you plan to do with your gap year, you can almost always skim some money from the Rotary people. So that's definitely worth trying out. Then you also want to consider the plan for progression, as in you don't have to spend the same amount of money every month of the gap year. It can be different amounts, front-loaded, middle of the year you're investing, end of the year, whatever it makes sense for you, but just know that you don't have to be spending the same amount throughout the gap year. And lastly, there's all sorts of low and no cost opportunities that you can incorporate into your gap time. So we've covered most of them. I think the one thing I haven't mentioned yet is au pairing, which is nannying. You do have to like children for this one, but if you do like kids, you can do a cultural exchange where you go and live with a family and you take care of the kids, usually for 20 to 30 hours a week, and then you get free room and board and usually a stipend as well. So that's a really cool option, especially if you want to spend time in Europe, because there are very few ways to spend more than 3 months at a time in Europe, but au pairing is one of them. So that is a great opportunity to consider as well. So just knowing that all of this makes gap time actually very financially feasible if you can really understand the ways that it's going to work for your family. And I just want to share my poster child for affordable and cool gap years, Michelle. She started thinking about a gap year when she was about 15, and her parents said, "That's awesome, go for it, but we're not paying for it." So she had to self-fund her entire gap year. So she started working and saving towards her gap year. She applied and got several scholarships, and she participated in lower cost opportunities. So what her parents did offer was they said, "We will give you Julia, and you and Julia go figure it out." So they invested in me, and I helped her. But this is what she ended up doing. She ended up, first of all, her goals were that she wanted to become fluent in Spanish, and she wanted international development experience because she wanted to go into development work. So she spent the first part of her gap year, she worked over the summer, spent 3 months in Guatemala gaining proficiency in Spanish by working or going to a language school, staying with a homestay family. Awesome experience in Antigua. Came home for the holidays and then went down to Oaxaca, Mexico. She interned at a women's microfinance cooperative and got to use that Spanish, got very fluent during that experience, and then ended her gap year with this amazing solo travel experience in Colombia and Peru. And she did that all on the money that she saved leading up to her gap year. I also just... She ended up spending, I think, about $15,000 or $17,000, somewhere in that range. And the travel grant that she got was $5,000 of it. So she raised about $10,000 on her own. Yeah. I also recently interviewed a young man for my podcast named Arjun. He traveled to 100 countries on his gap year, and he self-funded the entire thing. And he did that through just working his butt off all through high school. And he insisted, his parents were like, "We would have contributed," but he said no. And he did stuff that I wouldn't necessarily put my rubber stamp of support on as far as like the way that he was traveling. He was dating a lot of like people he didn't know he stayed with, a lot of meals that were given to him by locals. He just did it very, very, very local and very shoestring, but he had an absolutely incredible adventure. So, Michelle is maybe our more reasonable person to copy in that regard. But let's talk a little bit about when this all happens. How many of you are juniors? Juniors? Okay, perfect. So, and then who are you representing? A sophomore. Okay, so everybody has time, which is great. Even if you think that even if you're sure that you're taking a gap year, you really don't need to start putting plans in place until senior year. So junior year is really for when you're dreaming and coming to, these types of presentations and maybe starting to save towards your gap year. But then fall of senior year is really where you start trying to get those plans in place, doing that goal setting. You can always do goal setting earlier, but sometimes, you change so much in high school that you don't want to really set up your plans firmly until you start getting a little bit more into senior year. And oftentimes senior year is also, or fall of senior year is when you'd be applying to colleges if that's your pathway. And then you really, once those applications are out the door, that's when you can start connecting with programs, booking tickets, starting to get really serious about putting those plans in place. And then summer before your gap year, you're doing mental preparation, you're physically preparing, all that good stuff, and then you're on your way. A couple of things to consider in this regard. A lot of students do apply. If you can make a good decision about where you want to go to college and you want to go to college, applying senior year is the easiest pathway because you can defer your acceptance from almost every college. Not every college, but a lot of them will accept a gap year deferral, and you usually write a letter saying this is why I want to take a gap year, and they rubber stamp it and they hold your spot for a year, and you don't have to do anything on your gap year except maybe update them once or twice. Some students, and increasingly this is true, they just don't have enough information about where they want to go to school, and they need to use their gap year to figure out and answer some of those questions. Totally possible to apply on your gap year as well, and then you see where the chips fall, you make a decision, all that good stuff. Colleges do like gap year students. They like them when they apply on their gap year, and they like them when they ask for a deferral. So you don't need to worry about what the college is going to think. They know that gap year students are more mature. They know that gap year students have a higher retention rate once they get to college. So if you are applying on your gap year, use your gap year to like add color to your personal statements and everything.
There is, some people say, oh, she's gonna take a gap year. I don't know if that's good because she will miss the rhythm of classes.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
Hard time getting back to class.
So
You just said that it's
it is. So actually, Middlebury College and UNC Chapel Hill both did studies about this. And they found that gap year students actually have higher GPAs and graduate sooner than traditional students. And we think this is just because actually, counterintuitive to what it might seem like, when you take a step away from the classroom environment that you've been in for 13 years, you have that chance to recharge and explore your interests in other ways, and then you're excited for like the rhythm of the college experience again. Most students really want to go to college. If they want to go to college, they're not going to not want to go to college after their gap year. If anything, they're going to be more engaged and more excited and more ready for that learning. So you can tell those people that they are wrong, and Middlebury proved it. But no, it is something that I think is still kind of a misconception. And one thing I will say is that if a STEM person is taking a gap year, or someone who wants to major in mathematics, it is a good idea to take an online math course before you start college again, just to kind of re-engage that brain. But other than that, it takes a little bit of time to get used to college anyway, and that's the same as if you go straight in or if you take a gap year. Deferral process. So this is something where you want to create a line item in your college planning, spreadsheet, and you want to make sure that each of the schools you're applying to allow deferrals and what that process is and when their deadlines are, and then planning to write a really thoughtful deferral letter when the time comes. And the nice thing about deferral letters is that they are not binding. So if you create a plan and you send it to them and then the plans change because you change, the college is not going to hold that against you. So you should write it in good faith, but then know that you can change what you end up doing. So that's usually usually what will happen is you get into a school, around this time of your senior year, you would put down a deposit at that school, and then you'd have a little bit of lead time to write that deferral request. They rubber stamp it, and then you're set to go. And then around that springtime of your gap year is when you start filling out all those housing requests and all that kind of good stuff. And then lastly, how does the money, factor into this? A lot of times, in-house merit aid packages, they sometimes will defer along with admission, but not always. So you always have to ask. It changes school by school and scholarship by scholarship and all of those kinds of things. With FAFSA, you will have to just put in your information during your gap year, get a new package the following year. Sometimes those things changes. If you have a lot of siblings and some are in college and some are out of college, sometimes the package will change too, which could benefit or not benefit you depending. The other thing is that college credit can be tricky. Some colleges will let you take some credit from your gap year into college, and that can be great. Other times colleges will say, don't even try to if you get a credit, we're going to consider you a transfer student. So you really have to also know what the college credit rules of your future institution are too. I believe, for example, UVM will let you take a couple credits in. If you were to take a language course or an experiential program that offered credit, they may let you take some of those credits in. They're not as bullish about as some other schools. Yeah.
For example, I know that many colleges, you can come to UVM and take a year abroad,
Mm-hmm.
a semester abroad.
Yeah.
Is this a cheaper way to do an experience like that?
That's a great question. I would actually say probably study abroad is going to be more affordable because a lot of times your aid, if you have any kind of scholarships and stuff like that, will actually be factored into your study abroad fee. So that would probably be the better way to do it. Whereas if I would say that, there's a lot of things that you can do on your gap year that don't have credit attached at all, that are more experiential and just for growth and that kind of thing. Yeah. And oftentimes, a lot of the gap year type programs are not in a classroom, whereas in study abroad, traditionally you're attached to a university in another country. So, yeah.
I mean, they go to university, they're already expensive.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Really depends on the student, I suppose, and how serious they are about their study abroad experience. Yeah. So we're almost at the end here. So if you have questions, more questions, think about those while I go over these resources. But a lot of places where you can go and continue this gap year exploration. Go Overseas is a great resource for all sorts of different gap year opportunities and travel opportunities and study abroad and teaching abroad, all sorts of great stuff. The cool thing about Go Overseas is that they have a mechanism by which you can see reviews from other participants. So it's kind of like a Yelp for gap year opportunities. It's very useful. The Gap Year Association, another amazing resource. There's program listings, there's planning guides, there's deferral guides, there's scholarship listings, there's events. So a lot of times gap year programs, if they're offering an info session or something like that, you can see that on their events calendar. Really, really great resource. Also, the Gap Year Association accredits programs. So if you're looking for like the easiest way to be like, this is a very high quality program, you can look for a Gap Year Association accredited program, which will just signal to you that they've been through a very robust vetting process. Gap Year Radio, I've already mentioned that before, but I'm in my 10th season of hosting that podcast, and there's new episodes coming out all spring, so check those out if you're interested. And then you can find me all over the internet. I also do, for seniors, I do free exploratory conversations. So all of you are welcome to reach out to me senior year. We could have a free chat. Whether or not you need counseling or not, I'm always happy to talk. And if you have questions, and you already found me at my table, so that's good. And I do have a newsletter that you can opt into if that's helpful. But before we adjourn, are there questions? Are there things that are left unsaid, or things that would be specific to your interest? Is there anyone online? Oh, there are people. Hi, everybody online. But no questions from our peanut gallery online. Got it. Yeah.
My sophomore is perhaps completely ignorant of the concept.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Do I just kind of try to expose her to this, or is there anything in particular that
Yeah. It's such a good question. I think.
she's focused on? Nobody knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
Maybe she does.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that first normalizing this and saying, did you know that like so many more people than there used to be are taking gap time and just using it as this time to explore, and colleges like it because they like students who know more about what they want to do and why they're there. So kind of starting with just normalizing language around it, and then once based on her interest, that's really where you can hook them. So as I've talked, remind me your name, Leva. Okay, so we were talking about like conservation projects and animal projects. And if Leva had been gap year hesitant, but I had found that out about her, I could have described all these really cool wildlife experiences that she could have and how that was going to help, inform her college experience and stuff like that. So based on what she's interested in, you can usually find like programs or opportunities and give examples of how that could actually look on a gap year. Yeah. What else? Anyone?
I follow you on your gap year radio.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, it's funny when I talk to people who've listened to me a lot, because sometimes, when you're listening to a podcast, it feels like you already know somebody, which is kind of cool. So thanks for listening. All right, are we ready to get back to our Saturday nights? Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for being curious. There's tons of resources in the back if you have more things that you want to grab on the way out. So thanks so much.